Hello and welcome. Hi, I'm Dave, and today we're going to get back to some vanilla JavaScript basics as we build a random name generator. The name generator will give us suggestions for a coding YouTube channel name, much like this one. Our random name generator will ask for the user's first name, and then it will give us suggested names based on random words about development and the user's first name or whatever else the user might input into the text field. I've got Visual Studio Code open on the left, and on the right I've got the completed project. So on the left, let's go ahead and start creating our folders and files we need to get started. I'm going to go to the View menu and go to Terminal, which you can see is Control plus the backtick if you choose the keystrokes instead, and open the terminal. And I have git bash installed, which lets me do Linux commands. If you don't have git bash, you want to install git, and of course you'll get bash with that, no pun intended. And from there you can use Linux commands like make directory, which is mkdir. And from there I know I'll need a JavaScript directory, I'll need a CSS directory, and I'll need an image directory. So I can enter all three of those, and then suddenly they're created over here. Likewise, you can use the touch command to create a file like index.html. If you're not comfortable with those, of course, you can use the icons here in VS Code as well. That is a little quicker for some things. I'll go ahead and close the terminal now. And in the HTML, I'm going to use an emit shortcut, or an emit abbreviation, as it says here, and it will put in the skeleton of the page that I need already. Now, we have to scroll just a little bit, but I'll get rid of the file tree here in a minute. For now, I'm going to put random name generator in the title and save this file. Now I can go ahead and press Control plus the letter B, and it does hide the file tree. Now I'm going to expand Chrome, and we're going to go to cdnjs, and you can see that's cdnjs.com. I'll just type the word font, and it will bring in Font Awesome, and I can click the copy link tag, and then I can go back to Visual Studio Code, and just below the title I'm going to paste in this link to Font Awesome because we're going to use that. And now I'm also going to put in a link to our style sheet. We'll use the rel attribute to say style sheet, and then I'm going to add the link. It will be in the CSS folder we created. And then I'm going to have a file named main.css. And I'll close that out, Control S to save. I'll press Control B once again to open the file tree. And if I highlight this folder, I can click the new file icon and create main.css. And that's probably the last thing we'll do today is add the CSS. We'll start with HTML, and then we'll go to the JavaScript, and then we'll eventually add the CSS. So in the JS folder, let's add a main.js file as well. And now I need to bring a couple of things in that I'm going to just pull over from my previous work. And the first thing is the names lookup. We're going to use modules today. And so I'm going to create a second folder in JS, and this will be called names.js. This file contains two objects that we're going to use as object lookups, and I just wanted to paste those in. You can see they have developer words, code words, things like that, and we're going to use those as lookups. So if we specify names1 and then in brackets 0, we get the word code, and that's what a lookup would be. Likewise, we could do names1 with a bracket and 9 and get the word text. So we're looking up the name by a number of 0 through 9. So I'm going to save that. You can pause and type that into your file because we're going to need these to generate the names. Okay, I'm also going to paste in an image I'm going to use for the background. And this image will be in my code repository, but I got it at unsplash.com, and you can easily go there and get that image or another one that you prefer to use. Back in the index.html file, I'll hide the file tree so we can see more of that, and I'll change this back to where we're looking at the completed project once again. We can start adding in the body because we've got just about everything in the head. Well, we haven't added the JavaScript yet. Let's go ahead and use the script tag for that. With source equals, and then we say JS in our main JS file, and that finishes that out. Now in the body we're going to use semantic HTML where possible. We'll start with the header, and then we'll use an H1 to put in our title, code channel random name generator. And in the header we're also going to use an icon from Font Awesome. So I'll save our HTML and we'll go back to Chrome and I'll expand it again. Now we'll go to Font Awesome, and in Font Awesome we're going to search for YouTube. And once the YouTube icon comes up, we'll click on that, and then we'll find the copy HTML element right here and click on that. Now we can go back to our code and we can put that right above the H1. While we have Font Awesome open, let's go ahead and get the other icon we're going to use today, and that's a check mark. So we just search icons for check mark, and to the far right we'll go with the check. And once again we'll copy the HTML from this icon page, and now we can resize Chrome again and show our finished. And here you see where the check is that we're going to use on a button, and here's the YouTube icon that we're using as well. So for now, even though I'm not to the point of using this check yet, I'm just going to paste it in here and we'll know where to come back and get it. After the header, we need the main element. Inside this main element, if we break our app down into components here, we've got our header and then the main. But inside the main, we actually have two components. We have this enter first name kind of search area, or at least submission form. And then we have the suggestions that appear after we submit that. So at first, you don't see the suggestions. So they're a separate component from the enter first name area. And we're going to break those components into sections today. So we'll start out with the section element, which is a semantic HTML tag. We'll give it the class equal to submit section. And now inside this section element, we're going to have a form, but first we'll have an H2 heading. I'll give it the ID of form heading. Then we'll give it a class equal to off screen, because this is one of the elements that we want to take off screen, that will leave it there for a screen reader, but we do not need to see it, as we don't see an H2 on the page here. But it is still in the DOM and it is readable by a screen reader. Okay, for this heading, we'll put enter your first name, because that's what this section is all about. Okay, after that, we need to start creating our form. And just temporarily, I'm going to go ahead and expand this because we're not doing anything that would appear over there in the final version. So for the form, we'll give it an ID equal to submit form. We'll give it a class equal to submit section, 2 underscores, and form, which is kind of just, I'm using a little bit of the BEM, block element modifier naming convention. Very loose adaptation of it though, because I'm not using it everywhere. Now we'll have our input element, and there's so many attributes that I'm going to add each one on a separate line so they line up. The first will be type equals text. The next will be the ID equal to, and let me copy the submit section form because this will make it type a little faster. Submit section, and it will be text input. Then I'll copy all of that, and the class will also be that. There we go. Then this will be required, and after that we'll give this a max length equal to 20, a placeholder, and it will say enter first name, and then an aria dash labeled by, this is once again for a screen reader, and we're going to say it's labeled by the form heading because the form heading already says enter your first name. So that should be accurate. Okay, after the input, which we just completed, we'll have a button. This will have a class equal to submit section button, so I can paste that and then just replace this with button. And then we'll give this an ARIA label equal to submit. And that is because we're not going to have text on the button that can be read. This is where we need to go back and grab our check mark and put it in the button. And save that, and we've completed our form. Okay, with that much complete, let's move on to the next section, which doesn't have much in it at all before the JavaScript creates the rest. The first has a section with an ID of suggestion section, and we'll just copy that because the class will be very much the same, except it has two classes. So we'll have suggestion section and a class named hidden. Now inside our section element, and let me scroll to give a little more room, make it easier to see, we'll have another H2, and this will be suggestions. This one will be visible on the screen. And then we'll create an ordered list. And you can see in the finished product over here, we have an ordered list, 1, 2, 3, and 4. But right now, this ordered list will be empty, and that's where we will dynamically put content with JavaScript. And then we'll put in our paragraph that will say your mileage may vary, which is the universal abbreviation, at least in English, I believe, for that. And we'll just say click the name to see if it is already taken. And what we're going to do is just link each of these to YouTube, and if the name is already taken, it'll pull up that channel, and if it's not taken, it will give a YouTube 404, and you'll know it's available. And with that, we have completed the HTML. So let's right-click, and I'm going to choose Open with Live Server. Now, if you're not familiar with Live Server, go to your extensions in Visual Studio Code, search for Live Server by Ritwick Day, and you'll want to install Live Server. It lets you launch a local development server instead of loading pages out of your folder that you have on your hard drive, and you shouldn't do that. You should always use a development server, so that's much more like you're on the web. And there's some things that just won't work when you're loading from your file system instead of a server anyway. So what I'm going to do is right-click and choose Open with Live Server, and we should see our plain old HTML over here. And this is what we have so far with our HTML that's not styled, and we have not applied any JavaScript. Okay, that's not too exciting. So let's go back to our names.js as we're ready to start in on some JavaScript. And if you'll remember, I pasted in our two objects, names1 and names2. And notice they both have export const because we're going to import those in our main.js file. And speaking of that, one thing we didn't add to our index.html, and I'm glad I thought of that we need to do, is in the script tag, we need to add a type, and this type equals module. And that's because we're going to use imports. So make sure you have that as well. And then in your main.js file, we'll start with our import statement. And we're going to import both of these in one line. So we have a curly brace, and then names1, comma, names2, and then we'll say from, and now we just need to indicate the file, /names.js. The dot indicates, yes, right where we are in this folder, and then we're looking for the names.js file. Okay, from there, we need to start creating our functions. And really, we've only got 5 functions to break down for this application. And the first one that I usually always create is an init app, means initialize your application. And I like to call it init app. And from there, I'll make it an arrow function. It will kind of be a procedural function, and it will handle everything we need to get the application set up. And really what we need to do is add a event listener to the form. So I'm going to document get element by ID, and we named our form submit form. Let me go ahead and expand the code for now. And now we'll be able to see the rest of this. It's .add event listener, and I'm listening for the submit event. So our anonymous function will receive an event. And now inside the function, we can do several things. But the first thing we want to do is event.preventDefault, because when a form is submitted, it reloads the page by default, and we don't want that. From there, we're going to clear out suggestions or previous suggestions if we've already ran the application once. We're going to generate names, and then we're going to display names. And that pretty much takes care of everything that will happen when we submit the form. But before we create any of those functions, let's go ahead and call our init app by adding an event listener directly to the document with DOM content loaded, and then we just call init app. Okay, the first function to create is where we clear out the suggestions. So we'll say const clear suggestions. And we don't really need to pass anything into this one. And the first thing we want to do is grab the display section, the full section really. So document.getElementById, and that was the suggestion section. And once we've grabbed that, we can use an if statement to say if, and now I'll say not with the exclamation mark, but if the display does not have, I'll call the class list and then contains. So I'm looking for the class list or the class hidden, which we did apply. But if it does not have hidden in the class list, then we want to display or actually hide that. So we'll toggle and we'll put hidden in there. Now hidden's already there when the app loads, but after we've displayed a section and then we go to clear something out, we'll need to reapply the hidden class. So that's what this is saying. If hidden is not in the class list, go ahead and add the hidden class to that element. And then we'll grab our list. So I'll define our list, and I'll use a query selector here. Document query selector, and I'm getting the suggestion section and then the ordered list, sorry, that's in the suggestion section. And then here I'm going to do something you might not have seen me do in previous tutorials, and I'm just going to use the inner HTML to clean this out. Now I don't usually use inner HTML, but I have a purpose for using inner HTML throughout this tutorial, and that is to talk about how to use it and how to sanitize the input. So I just want to stay consistent and use it here when I clear everything out too. So that is our clear suggestions, and what that does is takes the inner HTML of the ordered list and just wipes it out. So now in this spot we can call our clear suggestions function. Okay, now to get more to the meat and potatoes of the app itself, we want to generate names with the generate names function. And inside this function, the first thing we're going to do is define a random number array, and this will be empty to start out with. But after we have that, we'll get back to some basics here with a for loop. I like to use for each when possible, but I specifically want this to loop a set number of times, and I don't really like using while loops too much myself. So I'm going to create a for loop. And notice in a for loop, none of these are required if you go back to my basic JavaScript course. So while you'll usually see an incrementer here at the end, like that, you don't have to have it there. And so I'm not going to have it there because I don't want it to increment right now. I want to do it a little bit later. So I'm going to define a random number, and this goes way back to the basics and the beginnings of the JavaScript course that I have, and I'll provide a link to that in the description below. We'll start with math floor, and now inside math floor I'm going to have math random and then times 10. And if you remember about generating random numbers, you'll know this does not generate a random number between 1 and 10 or from 1 to 10. This actually generates a random number from 0 to 9. And that's exactly what I want. If we look back at our names.js, our lookup, they go from 0 to 9. So that is exactly what we need there. Now that we have our random number and we're in the loop, we're going to say if random num array includes the random number. So if the random number is already in the array, continue. What that does is it skips this loop iteration. Now, what's good about that is we haven't incremented our loop yet. So I'm going to increment it after that. And in between there, we're going to actually add the random number if it doesn't exist in the array already. So at this point, if the random number is already in the array, it skips these lines and jumps back to the beginning, but it hasn't been incremented. So what we end up with at the end is an array with 4 random numbers, and that is exactly what we want to have. And we need to take these 4 numbers that are random and turn them into 4 random names that we put together. So I'll call each one of these a suggestion. I'll have suggestion 1 equals, and let's go ahead and pull in the first names1, the first object. And now we'll refer to, we need a number here, if you remember, for names1. So 0 would equal one string, 9 would equal another, as it shows us right here. So we'll refer to our random array to get those numbers. So here we'll say random num array, and we're going to go ahead and just take specific numbers now. So this would be 0 as far as the random number array, whatever number possibly exists right there. And then we're going to combine it, just concatenate it with a plus, and pull in the second object. And now we'll do the same thing. So I'll just copy this, but let's go ahead and pick a different random number out of our array. So now we've got 0 and 3. Now I'm going to repeat this. So we get 4 suggestions. So here we'll have 2, 3, and 4. In the first position, let's just go through the count. 0, 1, 2, and 3. Now let's randomize it here. So 0, 3, 2, and 1. And now that we have our 4 different name suggestions, and just to quickly walk you through what we're doing is we're picking a name from the first object and a name from the second object, and we're using random numbers generated to randomly pick those names from each object. Now these are numbers we selected specifically 0 through 3, but it will completely be random numbers, so who knows what we'll end up getting. So we'll say return, and I'll have this array, and now we can put in suggestion 1. Let me copy. And so we're returning an array with 4 random names. And that is the end of our generate names function. Now that we've completed generate names, let's go ahead and call that here at the top, and we'll say const names. Well, let's call it names array equals generate names. And now, before we even get to display names, let's go ahead and log this names array. And we'll go ahead and resize Visual Studio Code, and we'll make our browser big. Of course, the page doesn't look any different than it did earlier, but now I'm going to open DevTools by pressing Control-Shift and I. And we haven't ran anything yet, but we're initializing the app, and we're listening for this button click. So if I click the button right now, it should be required and let me know that. Yes, we need to put something in there, so I'll just put in Dave. And I'll click the button, and in our console, we got Coder Life, Dev Development, Web Stacker, Code Media, just 4 random suggestions. and that worked out as it should. So 4 random names. And if we go back into our function, where we get those random names, if I come down here to generate names, we could actually log the array as well. So we had this random number array when it's finished, so you can see exactly what it contains. And now I'll need to come back here and put my name in again, click the button. Oh, random array is not defined. I did something wrong. What did we call that? Random num array. There it is. Said what was in my head and not what was in the type. There we go. And so there's our random number array, 6, 4, 8, 0. And now we got 4 other random names: Dev Life, Coder Media, Web Stacker, Code Development. So if we go back with 6, 4, 8, 0 and look at our code, once again, get out of this and resize this. Back to our code, 6480. I'm going to expand this. So this first number was 6. And the one in the third position in the random number array was 0. We had 6480. I can comment that here. 6480. So random number 0 was 6, and random number 3 was 0. Here, random number 1 would be 4, and random number 0 was 6, and so on. And that is how the names are pulled out. So 6 and 0, for example, which was the first one, would be Dev Life. And I believe, if we look back here and open this back up, Dev Life. So that is how that is pulled together. Okay, now that we've walked through that, back to our main.js, and we're ready to look at the display names function. Okay, we'll scroll down to below generate names, and we'll start defining our display names function. And this is going to have a parameter. This will be the names array that we just got back from the generate names. Okay, inside the function, the first thing we want to do is grab the list. And we had that earlier in our clear suggestions, so I can really, here it is, I can really just copy that. And now that we've grabbed our ordered list, I want to grab the text input from where we've asked the user to enter their first name. And we'll call it raw first name because we have not sanitized this input. Get element by ID, and it was the submit section 2 underscores text input. And we'll get that value, not a node value, just the value. I think I need to disable that. Okay, text value. And from there, I'm going to name this just first name, and we'll skip the sanitizing the input at first so I can show you why we want to sanitize the input. So we'll skip that one line, and we'll start with our for each loop with the names array. We'll go for each name. And now this is where we start to display the random names we got back. So we'll start with our list, that's our ordered list, and I'm going to use inner HTML. And now I'm going to use template literal here, which you start with the backticks and start a list item. And now I'm going to complete it on a separate line because it'll be just a little longer sometimes when I'm doing everything inside an inner HTML. So I've got the YouTube, what am I missing here? YouTube, oh, there we go, youtube.com/ and we want to put in the name, where we have for each name in the loop, so that's the name that we have generated. And then we're going to put in a target equal to underscore blank, so it opens in a new tab. And then the link itself will display the name that we've generated. Now we end the link, we end the list item, and that's the end of the template literal to begin with. So this is the numbered list item, like number 1. And now after this, we're going to use another list.innerHTML and set that equal. And before, actually, I should have done a plus equal, because we're going to continue to add as we loop through the array. So we concatenate. And if there's nothing there, it's okay. It will just start adding to it. So we'll have list innerHTML, and now another template literal. This will start the unordered list that comes underneath the numbered list items. And this will be the variations that has the user's name in it as well. So we have our unordered list. Let's break down to another line, start our list item. We're once again going to have YouTube. So I'll copy this much. But now we need to add just a little bit more. We'll add in the first name that we get from the user. And after the first name, we'll put an S. So instead of just Dave Code Life, it would be Dave's Code Life, something like that. And then we'll add the name. Remember, this is a template literal, so we can just put all this together in one string and insert the variables this way. And then we'll put the quote after that. We'll put in the target equal to underscore blank again, so it opens in a new window. And now we need to put in all of that again. So first name, let me have this wrap with Alt-Z in Visual Studio Code. There we go. First name, an S, and then the name again. And then we want to close out the link and close out the list item. But that's not all. So we need to continue this template literal with another list item. And the second one will be a variation on that, where we actually rearrange these. So I'm going to copy everything. And then to end this all, we won't end it there either. We need to end with the /ul. But let's go ahead and change this variation. Now it needs to start with the name that we generated, and then have with, and then the first name. And that would be the same here. So, well, there we've got the $sign there. Okay. First name, we need to get rid of this S. So it's name with first name. So this would be dev life with Dave versus Dave's dev life. There we go. And now we've completed all the inner HTML, and we've completed our for each loop, but it won't display yet because we have that hidden. So we need to grab the display, and we did that in our clear list also. Let's grab both of these lines because it's very similar. So we've grabbed the display, but now we want to do the opposite of this. So now if the display class list contains hidden, we want to toggle it. In other words, before is if it didn't contain hidden is what we had up here because of the exclamation mark. This is if it does not contain hidden. This is if it does contain hidden. We're just toggling the hidden class. So this will actually show the section instead of hide it. And we'll save that. All right, with that complete, let me go ahead and make VS Code smaller. We've got our app here. I'm going to go ahead and expand it so we can see everything. We can reload, and I'll open DevTools because we want to see what comes up over here. I still have those console log statements. Now notice we're not seeing anything yet, but if I put in Dave and I click the button, we don't get what we expected because I think I forgot to call this back in our init app. So we have our display names, but it never got called. Let's go back up to the top, and that is correct. So we need to take our display names, pass in the names array, and I'll go ahead and leave that console log there for now. Come back to Chrome and I'll type in Dave, click enter, and hey, there we've got, well, we've got some extra things in here too, but there we've still got our console log statements, we've got our suggestions, and I'm guessing they will open to YouTube pages. Dev Made Easy is a 404, so that might be a good name for somebody. But let's look at why we're getting extra unknown list items here in our unordered list. All right, back in Visual Studio Code, I think we should find this quickly. If we look at what we just created, this is the only place the problem could be. We're creating an extra list item for each name. I think what the problem is, here we've got li and then /li to close it out, but here we've got li and then another opening li instead of a closing li. So if we have /li for list item, we should be closing those out. Let's save. And let's try this again. We have Dave. There we go. Just 2 list items per 1 ordered list item, 2 unordered list items. And so now we've got everything we expected, except there's one thing that we haven't done yet, and that is sanitize the user input because we're using inner HTML. And here's the problem with that. And this opens your site up or your application to cross-site scripting attacks because people can insert HTML and therefore they could use a script tag and possibly insert JavaScript. Now we've limited this input to 20 characters, which helps because that would be more difficult to enter in a script attack. But if I just put in an H1 that says, hey, and close the H1 out, now I press enter, I have actually entered in these H1 elements right into the page. So you don't want to give your user direct access to add code to your application. So now let's look at how we can sanitize this input to prevent this from happening. Let's go back to Visual Studio Code. And I'll go ahead and expand it for now. Here, instead of first name, let's call this raw first name because that's the raw user input. And now we'll define first name here. And I'm going to set this equal to a function, a helper function called sanitize input. And we'll pass in the raw first name. So now let's define that sanitize function. We'll put it right below our existing function, if I could leave it where you can see that one even, because it's not a big function. We'll call it sanitize input, and here we'll put in an input value. Oh, let's go ahead and make it an arrow function. So I need the equals, and then the arrow, here we go. And now we'll just define a div, and we're going to call document.createElement and create a div. But we're not going to put the div anywhere. What we're going to do with it is use the text content, which escapes HTML characters, and set this input value as the text content of the div. And so now those HTML characters have been escaped. So now all we need to do is return the div.innerHTML. And by doing that, we're returning what's already been escaped. You wouldn't want to return it the way it was because it could be turned back into HTML. So the idea is to create a div that you're really never using and then just only using the div, honestly, to set the text content. You're not ever putting the div anywhere on the page or in the application. And then you're returning the div, but you're returning its inner HTML. So that leaves the text content escaped. If that makes sense, I hope it does, because now we can use that sanitize input right here in our function. I'll save this and let's go back to, once again, our bare bones unstyled application here. And I believe it probably reloaded already, but I did it anyway just to make sure. And now if I put in Dave, the app still works just fine. But let's try that H1 that I did before right here. And I put hey, then H1. Now it's been escaped. And so those HTML characters come through just as text, and we actually see them. So you can enter in the HTML, but it won't be processed as HTML. And that's what we needed to do to sanitize that. All right, we're ready to start styling the app, but there is one typo I made earlier that we definitely need to fix for it all to work, and that is in the link tag for the style sheet. You can see I typed another link here instead of href. That would not help us out. Let's change that to href, and now our style sheet is linked accurately to the rest of our application, and we can begin to style the code. I've got the iPhone 5 version pulled up over here on the right, which I like to design for the smallest viewport first, and then it's much easier to make it larger later than the other way around. So we start out with our CSS reset, and that's a margin of 0, padding 0, and box sizing of border box. And I'll save that, and we should see a few changes. Everything gets a little crammed over here. The next thing to add is the HTML element, and we'll start with font size, 16 pixels, which is the default anyway, but I usually add it there so we can refer to rem for root element units later. And I've been liking this Franklin Gothic font here lately, if I can find it. There we go, Franklin Gothic Medium, and VS Code fills in the rest. It does expand, but if you find that much, it should fill it in for you. I'm going to set letter spacing to 1.35 pixels, and the color I'm going to set to black right now, but I'll come back and change it very soon. I just don't want it to disappear because it will be white, so I'll save this much. Things changed over there a little bit. Now let's put some styling to the body element, and we'll start with min height of 100 viewport units. A background color, and this is RGBA, and I believe this was Dodger Blue to start out with. Yeah, it looks that light blue color, but I'm going to use a transparency of 0.4. Maybe we can come back and change the font color after this. Let's see. Yeah, we have that light blue, so I think white should show up now. So we really want the font color to be white. Not a great contrast, but at least we can see it there. After the background color, we're going to set a background-image, use URL, single quote, and now we need to go up a folder, which is 2 dots, and then slash, and now we can pick the image folder, and then the code image file that I'd saved. After the background image, we want to set the background size to cover, and then I'm going to use background-blend-mode and choose overlay, and that will use a little bit of that Dodger Blue we set in the back. Let's save that much. Nice. We've got a few little bit of colorful things here. We can see the white a lot better now. And now we'll go width 100%, but a max width of 500 pixels, and then a margin 0 auto, and padding of 10 pixels. Okay, scrolling up so we can start in on the header right underneath the body. Grab the header element, and I'll also grab the main element here for a few definitions. I'm going to set the background color on these as well, RGBA again, and I'm going to choose black, but then also set the transparency to 0.4, and let's save that to see what it looks like. Just a little darker there, it makes the font stand out better. And then a border, 1 pixel, solid white, and padding of 20 pixels. Let's save that. Now we have a clear header and a clear first section, and remember our second section is inside this area also, the main. This is the main div, but it is not visible until that hidden class is toggled. From here, let's apply some styles just to the header now. We'll set a display of flex, so it will turn into a row. Then justify content, and we'll space evenly. We'll align items to the center, and we'll set a gap between the items of 10 pixels. Save that. Looks good, except our YouTube logo is very small right now. Underneath that, let's choose the icon, which is the YouTube icon. So we specify that it's the one in the header. Say font size 5 rem, root element. Well, that's much bigger. There we go. Now after that, we can grab the H1, say font size 1.5 rem, and then text align. Oof, there we go, text align, center, and display block instead of it being inline text, and that will help with that. Okay, let's scroll up once again. Under the H1, we can put in the main. Just, whoops, we need curly braces here. Put in margin dash top and set that at 10 pixels. Can get rid of that, it's wrong. Save that much. We got a little break between the sections now. Now, just on all the sections, we'll go ahead and set a position of relative in case we need to put anything positioned absolute inside them, which we will, I believe. Submit section 2_ form. Width of 100% for the form. Display of flex. And we're going to justify content and use space dash between. Notice now our check mark is way over here and our input's way to the left. That's the form we're working on. I'll go ahead and copy this. So now I paste that and then put input. And then I'm going to paste it again and put button. So we can apply this to both the input and the button. And the first thing we're going to do is a font size to 1.25 rem. Padding 10 pixels. Border radius of 10 pixels. And we'll set the outline to none. And that got huge and it crowded it way off, but we'll bring that back around yet. Okay, a little more scrolling. And I'll paste that once again. And after this, we'll say input because we are going to change the width of that input. And I'll use the calc function and I'll say 100%, but then minus 60 pixels. If we save that, everything should come back a little bit. There we go. But after that, we still need to define a few things for the button style. Here I'll say min width 48 pixels. Min height of 48 pixels. That's about finger or thumb size. Set the cursor to a pointer. And then the background color set to lime green. That's kind of a good go color. Of course, you can set it to whatever you want to. Color of white. From there, letter spacing. And this is also 1.35 pixels. And then font weight of bold. Ah, that looks much better now for the button. And we're ready to start our suggestion area. So I'm going to type something into our app now and press enter so we get these suggestions that we can see also. And now we'll see the changes for them. Scrolling up, the first thing I'll do is the suggestion section class. We'll just put a padding dash top of 20 pixels to give it a little bit of room. And save that. We've got a little space there now. Go ahead and copy this class name. And now we'll apply this to the H2 that says suggestions. We'll say padding bottom of 20 pixels. Got a little extra room there now too. Now this will apply to the link hover, and to the link focus. We'll say color white and text decoration none, which would be getting rid of the underline. Much easier to read over here now. Scrolling on up, these next styles will apply to the list. We'll start with the ordered list. Set a margin on the left to push that over just a little of 20 pixels. a word break. Just in case the names are too long, we'll set it to break all, and that way it won't push out of the screen. What am I missing here? Oh, I typed work break. Must be reading my mind instead of word break. Okay, and then font size 1.15 rem. If we save that, we'll see a few changes there. And now you can actually see that word break in action where it says Web Development with Dave, a very long name. So it just breaks and brings the E down instead of pushing out of our container here. Okay, after the ordered list, we want to say ordered list and then any direct child that is an unordered list. And here we'll have padding on the bottom of these unordered lists of 10 pixels, margin on the left of 20 pixels, and margin on the bottom of 10 pixels. And that gives a little bit of a space between each one of these areas now. Scrolling on up, now we'll select unordered list and any direct child of the unordered list that is a list item, and we'll say margin dash top 10 pixels, and that should space them out a little bit more, just making it easier to read and looking better overall using some space. Now we need to define our off-screen class. And remember, this is what takes an element off the screen but still allows it to be read by the screen reader. And we'll use position absolute, and this is why we needed the relative position on the sections before. Set left to minus 10,000 pixels. And that got rid of the enter your first name area there, or heading. Now we also need to define the hidden class, and the hidden class should say display none. Now, right now the hidden class is not applied. So let's go ahead and reload. And now it is hidden. And now if I enter in Dave again and press enter, then it removes the hidden class and we can see everything. Okay, all that remains is a small media query section. So we'll say at media only screen and min-width of 768 pixels. For the body, we'll set the padding to 20 pixels. And then for the H1, we'll set the font size to 2 rem. And for the ordered list, the margin on the left will go from 20 to 40 pixels and the font size go to 1.5 rem. Okay, so let's expand this now. This again is the smallest phone, the iPhone 5 SE. Let's go to the 6, 7, 8. It's looking pretty good. Let's jump up to an iPad. Looks all right there too. iPad Pro, not bad at all. Let's go to a screen like my normal screen here, and there we see everything, and it's looking good. Let's reload from the start here. Pull this over just a little, and we'll enter in Dave again, press enter, and there we go. So now all I have left is a little bit of cleanup to get these console statements out of here before I send it up to GitHub. And remember, my code will be available for you in the description below, so you can see the source code and you can compare all of these things that we have done, and you can change it, you can tweak it, put in your own image, put in your own colors. Maybe there's something else you want to add to the program, and if you think there's something I missed out or just something that would add overall, please leave a comment below.